The crystal glass felt wrong in my hand. Too cold. Too perfect. Too much like every other thing in this room that had outlived entire generations of people like me. I stood near a stone column, the way I always stand in spaces I don't belong, close enough to the wall that no one looks twice. I've spent years making myself forgettable. The difference tonight was that I wasn't supposed to be. I was wearing a borrowed dress, and I was pretending to be his. His hand settled at the small of my back. Unhurried. Weightless. Like it had always lived there. He leaned down, his voice barely above silence. My grandmother is watching. She has survived 3 centuries. She will know if you're afraid. I looked up at him. This stranger. This impossible, ancient, beautiful stranger who had approached me outside my university building 6 hours ago with the strangest question of my life. And I felt something I had absolutely no permission to feel. If you've ever wanted something you had no business wanting, stay with me. You might recognize yourself in what happens next. And if stories like this are what you come here for, subscribe. So the next one finds you. It was the kind of cold that Helena, Montana does in November. Not dramatic, not cruel, just relentless. The kind that seeps into your coat before you've made it half a block and reminds you that the mountains don't care about your problems. I had $3.40 in my wallet. I had calculated, twice, whether that was enough for the campus vending machine, or whether I should just wait until I got home. I had a thesis draft due Thursday and a student loan statement I had stopped opening. I had a life held together with coffee, stubbornness, and the quiet, practiced belief that things would eventually turn. I was not thinking about vampires. He was standing just outside the engineering building doors. Not pacing. Not waiting in the obvious way. Simply present, the way very old things are present, as if the air around him had arranged itself accordingly. Silver pale hair. A stillness that had nothing to do with calm and everything to do with age. Eyes that had seen too much to perform surprise. He looked at me like he already knew what I was going to say. Helena Wick, he said. Not a question. I stopped walking. I don't know you. No, he agreed. But I need something from you. And I think you need something from me. He said his name. Lionel Polanski. He said it the way people say names that carry weight in rooms they don't explain, quietly, precisely, watching for recognition. I didn't give him any. Later, I would understand that this was part of why he chose me. The offer was this: $30,000, transferred before midnight, to accompany him to his grandmother's 100th birthday gala as his companion. One evening. One performance. A cover story already prepared. By morning, I would be returned to my ordinary life with enough money to finish my degree, clear my debt, and breathe for the first time in 2 years. Why me? I said. It wasn't really a question. It was a test. He answered it honestly, which I didn't expect. Because you don't belong to my world, he said. Everyone I know has already been shaped by it, their loyalties predetermined, their reactions calculated. I need someone my grandmother cannot read, through prior knowledge. He paused. I need someone real. The wind moved between us. I looked at him, really looked, and saw what I wouldn't be able to name until much later. Not danger, though it was there. Not beauty, though that was undeniable. What I saw was exhaustion. Ancient, immovable, quietly devastating exhaustion. The kind that lives behind the eyes of someone who has carried something heavy for so long they've forgotten what their hands felt like empty. I recognized it. I had worn it myself in smaller ways. What is your grandmother? I asked. He didn't hesitate. The same as me. I should have walked away. Every reasonable part of me, the part that had survived on discipline and clear thinking, that had rebuilt itself after the last time I let feeling override judgment, that part said no. I said yes. He nodded once, as if something had been confirmed rather than decided. On the drive over, in a car that moved through Helena like a held breath, he told me her name. Countess Irene. 100 years old, and still the most dangerous person in any room she entered. He told me she would ask questions. He told me to answer with the truth where I could, because she would know the difference. He told me one more thing, quietly, almost to the window. If she likes you, he said, there is no undoing it. I didn't ask what that meant. I should have. The estate appeared through the trees the way impossible things appear, suddenly, completely, as if it had always been there and you simply hadn't been paying attention. Lit from within by something that wasn't quite light. Older than anything I had driven past in this city my whole life. His hand found mine as we stepped out of the car.
Cool. Steady. Certain.
You're sure, he said. I looked at the doors. I looked at him. I'm sure, I said. And I walked inside. The estate had no business existing. That was my first thought. Not wonder, not fear, just the quiet, precise recognition that what I was looking at violated something. Some unspoken agreement between age and visibility, between old things and the modern world that was supposed to have replaced them. It sat beyond the edge of Helena's mapped edges, past the point where the roads stopped feeling maintained and started feeling permitted. The mountains rose behind it like they were keeping it. The trees on either side were too tall, too deliberate, grown not naturally but as walls, as concealment, as a message to anyone approaching that what lay beyond was not for the casual eye. The building itself. Stone. Dark timber. Windows lit from within by something amber and deep, the kind of light that belongs to fireplaces in rooms where serious things have been decided for centuries. 3 stories at least, though the roofline dissolved into the dark in a way that made counting feel presumptuous. I had lived in Helena my entire life. I had driven every road within 30 miles of the city. I had never seen this place. Not once. How is this here? I said quietly. Lionel didn't look at the building.
He looked at me.
It has always been here, he said. You simply weren't meant to see it yet.
Yet.
That word. I should have caught it then. I let it pass. He offered his arm at the door. I took it. Not because I was performing, because in that moment, standing at the threshold of something ancient and enormous and utterly indifferent to my comfort, I needed the anchor of something solid. Even if that something was him. We stepped inside. And the room changed. Not loudly. Not with any single moment I could point to. It was more like a tide shifting. The way a conversation adjusts when someone important enters a room and no one wants to be seen adjusting. Heads turned in sequences too smooth to be casual. Eyes landed and held. The music, live, string quartet, older repertoire than I recognized, continued, but even it seemed to recalibrate its volume, as if giving the moment its appropriate space. They knew him. Every person in that room knew him in their bones.
But they were looking at me.
I had expected curiosity. I had prepared for curiosity. What I had not prepared for was the quality of it, the patience behind it. These were not people wondering who I was the way you wonder about a stranger at a party. They were assessing, measuring, running quiet, centuries-old calculations behind beautiful, unreadable faces. These were people who had outlived everyone they'd ever underestimated. I felt the weight of it land on me like something physical. Like the temperature in the room had quietly, precisely dropped. Lionel's hand moved to the small of my back. The same gesture as in the car, steady, unhurried, but here it meant something different. Here it was declaration. Breathe, he said, so quietly only I could hear it. They smell hesitation. Is that literal? I said. A pause. Tonight, assume everything is literal. I breathed. A woman approached from the left. Late 40s in appearance, which in this room meant nothing, in a gown the color of deep water. Beautiful in the way that requires centuries of practice to perform without effort. Her smile arrived before her eyes did, which meant it was ornamental. Lionel said her name, Renata, in a tone that contained a full history I wasn't cleared to access. Old warmth. Older wariness. So this is her, Renata said. She didn't extend her hand. She looked at me the way you look at a question you haven't decided whether to answer. You look warm. I didn't know what to do with that. I run hot, I said. Something flickered across her face. Not amusement, exactly. Recognition, maybe. Like I'd said a word in a language she hadn't expected me to know. She looked at Lionel. A full conversation passed between them, without sound. Then she moved on. What was that? I said under my breath. A test, Lionel replied. Did I pass? He considered this for a moment longer than was comfortable. She didn't warn you away from me. For Renata, that's close to a standing ovation. I wanted to ask what a warning from Renata looked like. I decided I didn't want to know. We moved deeper into the room. With every step, I felt the architecture of the evening becoming clearer, the careful placement of people, the unspoken hierarchy in who stood where, who faced which direction, who watched the door and who watched Lionel, and who, I slowly realized, was watching me with the focused attention of someone solving a problem. I had spent years learning to read rooms, graduate seminars, faculty politics, the particular social geometry of institutions where resources are limited and egos are not. I understood subtext. I understood performance. I understood the difference between a room that is celebrating and a room that is waiting. This room was waiting. For what I didn't yet know. But I felt it in the base of my throat. That low, specific hum of something about to become irreversible. Lionel paused near the center of the room. He turned to me and for a moment, just a moment, the public composure slipped. Not dramatically. A fraction. Enough. She'll want to meet you soon, he said. My grandmother. The way he said it. Not warning. Not instruction. Something closer to an apology. That was when I understood. This was not a performance for a room. This was a presentation to something older, sharper, and far less forgiving than any audience I had ever stood before. For I had already walked too far inside to walk back out. She was seated at the far end of the room, and somehow that was the most powerful thing about her. Everyone else was standing, moving, performing the social choreography of the evening, circulating, greeting, angling. The room had its own current, and every person in it was being carried by it in some direction. Countess Irin sat perfectly still at the center of all of it, and everything moved around her. Not beside her, not past her, around her. The way water moves around something that has been in the river long enough to reshape the riverbed. She was small. That was the first thing. The kind of small that accumulates over a very long life, the body slowly returning itself to its essentials. Silver hair pinned with a precision that felt like a statement. A black gown with no ornamentation whatsoever, which in a room this decorated was its own kind of extravagance. Hands folded in her lap, ringed on every finger, the stones dark and old. Oh, her eyes. The same shade as Lionel's. That particular depth of gray that isn't absence of color, but accumulation of it. The eyes of someone who has watched enough people lie that honesty, when it appears, surprises them. Those eyes found me before we were halfway across the room. She didn't smile. She didn't adjust her posture. She simply looked. And I felt it like a hand pressed flat against my sternum. Firm. Measuring. Not hostile. Worse than hostile. Interested. Lionel's hand tightened slightly at my back. One small warning. Grandmother, he said, when we reached her. He bent to kiss her cheek. She allowed it, her eyes still on me.
Lionel, she said.
Her voice was low and unhurried, accented in something European that predated any border I could name. You're late. By 4 minutes. I've been waiting for you for 40 years, she said calmly. 4 minutes is an insult layered on a wound. Then she looked at me fully, and the rest of the room fell away.
Sit, she said.
Not unkindly. The way you say it to someone you intend to know. There was a chair beside her. I hadn't noticed it before. I sat. Lionel remained standing, slightly behind me, and I understood without being told that this part was mine to navigate alone. She studied my face for a long moment. I let her. I had learned a long time ago that the instinct to fill silence is the instinct that gives you away. She was testing whether I had learned that too. Apparently I had. "Your name," she said finally. "Helena." Her eyes moved at that. The smallest shift. "You share a name with the city." "I was born here," I said. "My mother liked the symmetry." "Your mother. Is she living?" There it was. The first question with a blade in it, wrapped in courtesy, in the natural rhythm of getting to know you conversation, but a blade nonetheless. She was looking for the soft places, mapping the architecture of what I was made of. "No," I said. "She died when I was 19. "And your father?" "Before that." Silence. Not the uncomfortable kind. The absorbing kind, the silence of someone taking in information and setting it carefully in place.
"So you have been alone," she said.
"For a long time." It wasn't pity. It wasn't even sympathy. It was the statement of someone who understood the specific weight of that sentence because they had carried their own version of it for a very long time. Something in my throat tightened unexpectedly. "I've managed," I said. "Yes," she said quietly. "I can see that. Managing is written all over you." She tilted her head. "It is also very tiring, isn't it? Managing." I did not expect that. I did not expect to feel, in the middle of this performance, in this impossible room full of immortal strangers, the sudden and completely undignified pressure behind my eyes that meant I was close to something I did not have permission to feel here. I looked at her steadily. "Sometimes," I said. She nodded.
"Once." Slowly.
As if I had confirmed something she had suspected for a while.
"Tell me," she said.
"What do you see when you look at my grandson?" The cover story was ready. I had rehearsed it in the car, in the quiet of my own mind during every moment since I'd said yes. 6 months. An introduction through mutual friends. Slow to trust, slower to love. I opened my mouth, saying none of it. What came out instead was this. Someone who has been carrying something heavy for so long that he's learned to make it look effortless. I think that's cost him more than he knows how to say. The room breathed around us. Somewhere behind me, I felt Lionel go very still. Countess Erin looked at me for a long time. Long enough that I started to wonder if I had miscalculated. If honesty had been the wrong currency in this particular exchange. Then something in her face shifted. Not softened exactly. Opened. The way a door opens that has been locked for a very long time, not easily, but deliberately. By someone who has decided to trust the person on the other side. She reached out and placed one hand over mine. Her fingers were cool. The rings pressed against my knuckles. "He has never brought anyone here," she said, very quietly. "In all the years. Not once." She paused. I think perhaps he was waiting until he found someone who would see him correctly.
I didn't know what to say to that.
I don't think she expected me to say anything. She squeezed my hand once, released it, and looked up at Lionel. "She stays," she said simply. Not as an invitation. As a verdict. The evening shifted around that pronouncement like a river finding a new direction. Quietly, completely, and without any possibility of going back. She found me when Lionel stepped away. That was not a coincidence. I understood that immediately. She had been waiting for the exact width of distance that would make intervention possible, not close enough for him to hear, far enough that I would feel it. I was standing near one of the tall windows that overlooked the grounds, holding a glass of something dark and untouched, watching the way frost had crept up the lower panes. The mountains beyond were invisible in the dark. Just the suggestion of them. The weight of them. I felt her before I saw her. The particular quality of attention she brought, focused, deliberate, stripped of any social warmth, registered at the back of my neck like a change in pressure. I turned. She was extraordinary. There is no other word for it, and I will not pretend otherwise. The kind of beauty that has had centuries to perfect itself into something beyond personal, something architectural. Dark hair. A gown the color of old wine. Eyes that held the particular coolness of someone who has made peace with wanting things they cannot have, and decided that wanting was the problem. She stopped at a comfortable distance. Not close enough to be intimate. Exactly close enough to be heard. "You handled Irin beautifully," she said. Her accent was Eastern European, precise, each word placed with the care of someone who learned this language as an adult and never lost their respect for it. I watched. "You didn't use the story he prepared for you." I didn't answer. "That was either very brave," she said, "or very lucky. I haven't decided which." "Does it matter?" I said. Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile. The shape of one, without the warmth. "It matters because brave women in this world survive longer. Lucky ones are just delayed." She said it without cruelty. That was the thing about her I would keep turning over for the rest of the evening. There was no malice in any of it. It was almost worse than malice. It was honesty delivered without investment in how it landed. "I know what you are," she said simply. I kept my expression steady. Years of graduate seminars and difficult conversations, and the specific discipline of being a woman in rooms that weren't built for you. All of it served me in that moment. "Then you know more than I do," I said. "I'm still figuring it out." She looked at me for a moment with something that might, in another life, have been respect. "You are a transaction," she said. "I don't say that to wound you. I say it because no one else in this room will say it clearly, and clarity is the only kindness I know how to give." She glanced toward where Lionel had disappeared into the crowd. He needed a reason to refuse the arrangement. You are that reason. One evening. Convincing enough to buy him time. Then you go back to your life, and he returns to the negotiations that have been waiting for him for 40 years.
She paused.
"I am those negotiations," she said. The room kept moving around us. Music. Low laughter. The clink of glass, and the rustle of old money. I stood in the middle of it and absorbed what she had just told me and did not let my face move. Because she wasn't wrong. About the structure of it. About what I had agreed to and what it was. The part that was hard, the part one had to actively work not to show, was that somewhere between walking through those doors and sitting with Countess Irin's hand over mine, the structure had started to feel like less than the whole truth.
"How long?" I said.
"You and Lionel." She looked at the window. At the dark mountains neither of us could see. "Our families have been aligned for a very long time. Lionel and I have been expected for nearly 2 decades. A pause. "He does not love me. I am aware of this. I accepted it because in our world, love is rarely the point. Stability is the point. Legacy is the point." She looked back at me. "And then you appeared." I didn't know what she wanted from me. Guilt, maybe. Or a treat. Or at least the decency of acknowledging what I had stepped into. "I'm sorry," I said and meant it. Not for being there. For what it cost her to stand here and say this with such perfect composure. There is a particular kind of grief that has been disciplined into elegance, and I recognized it the way you recognize something you've worn yourself. She looked at me sharply. She hadn't expected that. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't be sorry for me. I am not fragile." But something shifted beneath the words. Something she pulled back before it fully surfaced. She straightened, recollected herself with the swift efficiency of someone practiced at it. "I came to warn you," she said. "Not threaten."
Warn.
"Because I think you are a woman who deserves accurate information before she makes a decision she can't undo." She held my gaze. This world does not release people it decides to keep. If Irin has accepted you, and she has, I saw her face, then you are already something different than what you were when you walked in. Whether you choose it or not. She let that land. Then she turned to leave. Paused once without looking back. "He hasn't looked at anyone the way he looks at you," she said. "Not in all the years I have known him." Another pause. Smaller. More honest. I needed you to know that too.
She walked away.
I stood at the window and looked at the dark where the mountains were hiding and turned everything she said over slowly, the way you turn something fragile, carefully, completely, looking for the place where the truth lives inside the warning. She wasn't wrong about the structure, but I was starting to think she might be wrong about the ending. I heard it before I saw it. Not a crash. Not shouting. Something quieter and therefore more alarming. A sudden absence of sound in one corner of the room, the way a crowd goes silent not from shock but from the instinct to become invisible. The music didn't stop, but the people nearest the east corridor stopped moving, stopped speaking, and the stillness radiated outward like a stone dropped in still water. I turned. Lionel was already gone from where he'd been standing. I didn't see him move. That was the part that stayed with me afterward. One moment he was at the edge of my peripheral vision, composed and unhurried, the way he'd been all evening. The next, there was simply a space where he had been and he was across the room, and everything about the way he occupied that new space was different. The man standing in the corridor entrance was tall, broad, and very clearly not supposed to be there. Not a guest. The quality of his clothing was wrong. The quality of his stillness was wrong. The way his eyes moved across the room too quickly, mapping exits and bodies and distances with a calculation that had nothing to do with celebration. He saw Lionel. Something crossed his face that I will not call fear, because I don't think fear is quite the right word for what happens when a person realizes they have made an error so fundamental that no amount of fast thinking will undo it.
Lionel said something to him. Low.
I couldn't hear it across the room. I couldn't read his lips. I could only watch the quality of it, the way he stood, the way he didn't raise his voice, the way he didn't need to. Every century of authority he carried had compressed itself into that one quiet sentence. The man's response was physical before it was verbal. His shoulders dropped. Something left him, not fight, not resistance, but the pretense of either. Whatever he had come to do, he understood in that moment that it was finished. Two men appeared from somewhere. I hadn't seen them arrive either, and the intruder was escorted out through a side door that closed without sound. The music continued. The room began to breathe again, slowly, conversation resuming at the practiced pace of people who have learned to absorb disruptions without advertising that anything disrupted them. Within 2 minutes, you would not have known anything had happened, except that I had watched all of it. I had seen Lionel's face, not the face he wore for the room, not the careful, composed, centuries-old performance of a man who has mastered the art of appearing less than he is. The other face, the one underneath, the one that made decisions in fractions of seconds and felt nothing about them afterward. Not satisfaction, not regret. The simple, terrible efficiency of someone for whom power is not performance, but nature. It lasted only a moment. Then he smoothed it back into place and turned, and found me across the room as if he'd known exactly where I was standing the entire time. He walked back to me without hurry.
He stopped.
And waited. He didn't explain. Didn't offer context or softening, or any of the things a person offers when they want to manage how they've just been seen. He simply stood there and let me look at him fully, clearly, without the buffer of a cover story or a borrowed dress or a manufactured romance. He was letting me leave. That was what the silence was. He was holding the door open. I thought about Nadia's warning, about worlds that don't release people they decide to keep, about the $30,000 that had been a clean transaction 6 hours ago and now felt like the least significant thing that had happened tonight. I thought about my mother, who had died before I was old enough to ask her whether she regretted the loves that cost her. I thought about what it had taken me to rebuild after the last time I had trusted something that turned out to be smaller than it appeared. I thought about the specific, unbearable loneliness of being someone who is capable of a great deal and known for none of it. I looked at Lionel. Really looked. Not at the power. Not at the danger. At the man standing inside all of it, waiting with a patience that only centuries could have built, for a verdict he didn't try to influence. "I'm still here," I said. quietly,
Simply.
not as reassurance, as fact. Something happened to his face. I had watched him all evening, controlled, readable only in fractions, giving nothing away that he hadn't decided to give. But this was different. This moved through him before he could stop it, before the centuries of discipline could intercept it. Relief. Raw and unguarded, and so completely human that it cracked something open in the center of my chest, and I had to work, quietly and without showing it, to keep myself together. He had expected me to go. That was the thing I couldn't stop sitting with. He had shown me what he was, clearly, without softening, and he had expected it to be the end of it. He had stood there and waited for me to make the rational choice, the self-preserving choice, the choice that every sensible person in my position would have made, without hesitation. And the fact that my staying undid him, that completely told me more about his life than anything else that evening had.
How many people had left?
How many times had he watched someone understand what he was and decide the understanding was too much? How long had he been bracing for it?
I didn't ask.
It wasn't a moment for questions. I simply stayed beside him, and let that be enough for now. The evening moved on around us. The mountains held their dark outside the windows, and somewhere in the room Countess Erin watched us both with those ancient, knowing eyes, and I understood that whatever this was, it had already become something I didn't have a name for. Something I was no longer sure I wanted to name. Because named things can be evaluated, measured against risk and cost and the long, careful accounting of a life spent being responsible. And I was afraid, genuinely, quietly afraid, that if I looked at it too clearly, I would find that it was worth more than I knew how to carry. He took me to the balcony just before midnight. Not dramatically.
Not with ceremony.
He simply appeared at my side during a lull in the evening's relentless social current and said, quietly, "Come outside with me for a moment," and I went. The way I had been going toward him all evening, not because I was following, but because something in me had quietly, irreversibly decided. The cold hit immediately. Montana in November has no interest in mercy. But after hours inside that room, the weight of all those ancient eyes, the perfume and the candlelight and the accumulated pressure of a world I had no map for, the cold felt honest.
Clean.
Like something I could trust. The city spread below us. Helena, small and lit and real, nestled in the valley with the mountains rising behind it dark and permanent. My city. The place I had been born and struggled and rebuilt myself in, that I had always known and never seen from this angle before. I stood at the railing and looked at it, and felt, with a clarity that surprised me, that I was standing at the exact center of something. Before and after. The last moment that certain things were still reversible. Lionel stood beside me. Not close enough to touch. Just present. That particular quality of presence he carried, like weather, like altitude, like something you adjust to without realizing you've adjusted. For a while neither of us spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who have spent an entire evening performing and have reached, simultaneously, the point of exhaustion with their own performances. He broke it first. "You didn't have to stay," he said. "After what you saw." "I know. Most people wouldn't have." I turned to look at him then. Profile against the dark sky. The crescent moon just visible above the mountain line. His face carrying that particular stillness that I had been reading all evening and was only now beginning to translate accurately. "I'm going to tell you something," I said. "And I need you to let me finish before you respond." He turned, looked at me fully, nodded once. I see someone who has been alone for so long that he's stopped expecting anything different. I kept my voice steady. Not gentle. Steady. Because I knew instinctively that gentleness would make him retreat, but precision he would receive. I see someone who built walls so well that he's forgotten there was a reason for them once, and that the reason is gone now, and the walls stayed. I see someone who is very powerful and very tired, and so accustomed to people wanting what he represents that he genuinely doesn't know what to do with someone who just sees him. I paused. And I see someone who is standing on this balcony waiting for me to take back everything I just said, waiting for the part where I come to my senses. I held his gaze. I'm not coming to my senses, Lionel. I'm more sensible right now than I have been all evening. That's what makes this terrifying. He was very still. Not the controlled stillness of before. Something different. The stillness of something that has been braced for impact for a very long time and is slowly, disbelievingly realizing the impact isn't coming. When he spoke, his voice was different. Lower. The careful architecture of it gone. 314 years, he said. I waited. I have not said to anyone what I am about to say to you. I want you to understand that. Not because I couldn't find the words. Because there was never anyone I trusted enough to receive them. The wind moved across the balcony. Somewhere in the valley, a light went out. I have been lonely, he said, for so long that I stopped calling it loneliness. I called it nature. I called it the condition of what I am. I built a life that was full. Obligations, legacy, power, purpose. And I told myself that fullness and loneliness were simply two things that coexisted, and that wanting otherwise was a luxury I didn't have. He paused. And then you sat down beside my grandmother and told her the truth when you had every reason to lie. And something in me, something I had not felt move in longer than I can account for, moved. The city glittered below us. Small and real and indifferent to all of this. I don't know what this is, he said. I want to be honest with you about that. I know what it isn't. It isn't the transaction I proposed to you this evening. It stopped being that before we walked through those doors. I looked at him for a long moment. At this ancient, exhausted, quietly breaking man who had spent 3 centuries being everything to everyone and nothing to himself. I know, I said softly. And then I did something that surprised us both. I reached out and took his hand. Not romantically. Not dramatically. The way you take someone's hand when you want them to know they are not standing alone. He looked down at her hands, then up at me, and the last of his composure came quietly, completely apart. I don't know how to describe the rest of that night without making it sound like something it wasn't. It was quiet. That is what I remember most. The particular quiet of 2 people who have stopped pretending and don't yet know what to do with the relief of it. We stayed on the balcony until the cold became impossible. We went back inside and said goodnight to Countess Erin, who held my face in both her ringed hands and looked at me with those gray eyes and said nothing at all, which said everything. We drove back to the city as the last of the night became the first gray edge of morning. I was standing at the window of his penthouse when it happened. Winter light the color of pale silver was coming in across the mountains I had looked at my entire life. I was wearing his shirt. I had a cup of coffee going cold in my hands. I was thinking about my thesis, which was due Thursday, and about the strange, unnavigable distance between the woman who had stood outside her university building last night calculating vending machine change, and whoever I was now. I heard him behind me. I turned. He was on one knee. The ring box was open. The stone was dark, deep blue, almost black, old in a way that meant something. He wasn't performing. His face was open in a way I had only seen once before, on the balcony, in the dark, when he'd finally said the true thing. He looked, in this moment, less like a king than like a man. Uncertain and certain at once, the way you are when you have made a decision that frightens you and made it anyway. I know what this looks like, he said quietly. I know the argument against it. I could make it myself. We have known each other one night. The world I'm asking you to enter is not safe. The cost of this is real, and I cannot fully protect you from all of it. He paused. But I have spent 3 centuries making the careful choice. The strategic choice. The choice that protects the legacy and manages the risk and maintains the equilibrium. His voice dropped. I am so tired of the careful choice, Helena. I looked at the ring. At him. At the mountains behind him going gold at their edges with the rising sun. I thought about Nadia, who had been honest with me when she didn't have to be. About Countess Erin saying she stays like it was a verdict. About the way relief had moved through him on the balcony when I said I wasn't leaving. About what it costs to want something fully when you're old enough to know what wanting costs. About how the most reckless thing I had ever done, saying yes to a stranger outside my building for money, had led me here. To this light. To this man. To this impossible, real, quietly devastating moment. Okay, I said. Not breathlessly. Not with tears, though they were close. Steady.
Clear.
The way I had answered his grandmother. With the only thing I had that couldn't be faked. He closed his eyes for a moment. Just one moment. And in that moment, he looked so human, so relieved, so completely undone by one small word, that I felt something in my chest break open and remake itself into a different shape entirely. He stood. He slid the ring onto my finger. It fit as if it had been made for it, which I suspected, quietly, it had. Outside, the mountains caught the full light of morning. I stopped being the woman who came for the money, and became something I didn't have a formula for, and did not, for the first time in a very long time, feel the need for one. There are women in this city who would understand exactly what I felt standing at that window. Women who have been careful their whole lives, and then met something that made carefulness feel like a very small word for a very large life unlived. We don't talk about it, but we recognize each other. If this story pressed on something you thought you'd finished wanting, don't let it go quiet.
Subscribe.
There are others. Women like you.
Stories like this.
They are here, waiting, for exactly the moment you need them.